Welcome to the Thriving Misfits, the podcast where we celebrate resilience, embrace diversity, and challenge norms. I'm your host, Fiona Young, and in today's episode, I'm speaking with Qi Zhai-McCartney, a couples therapist, coach, and former finance professional whose career has spanned continents and industries, so from Wall Street to wellness. Qi has lived in and worked in 8 countries, bringing in a global and grounded perspective to her work with high-achieving individuals and couples now. And she is based in Singapore and is running Seeing Qi Therapy and Coaching, helping people align their inner lives with their outer success. So drawing on her own IVF journey and expertise in perinatal mental health, Qi brings warmth, insight, and emotional intelligence to the complex conversations we often shy away from. And whether it's about ambition, infertility, love, or life transitions. So I believe this conversation is full of heart, honesty, and hard-earned wisdom, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So welcome, Qi.
Thank you, Fiona. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here.
It's fantastic. And you and I, we have just recently met in person, but actually we came across each other via LinkedIn. So just a virtual connection. And when I met you here in Penang, I just felt like we immediately clicked.
Yeah, it was maybe one of the rare online to offline success stories, like online dating and finding your soulmate.
Absolutely. And we're going to talk a lot more about the whole relationship aspect and I suppose intimacy as well. But I'm sure the listeners would like to get to know you a little bit better. So I'm just going to kick it off with some fun questions. So you're a therapist, and in therapy sessions and, even in coaching, when I'm speaking to my clients, often they include tissues. So what's one underrated item every therapist should keep in their office?
Okay, so you are speaking like someone who has clearly worked on themselves and is familiar with therapy and coaching offices. So you're totally right. A therapist's office without tissue is maybe like a cafe that doesn't serve coffee. It's possible, but you might miss the best bits if you can't fully let go, right, of your fears, your frustrations, or any facades that you've been carrying around. One underrated item, I think smell is maybe underrated. Our sense of smell is so inextricably linked to our memories, both the good and the bad or traumatic memories. Scent is wired into our limbic system, which is the part of the brain that processes both emotion and memory. So I make it a point to use spa room spray and diffusers, and the calming scents help people walk in immediately and exhale, literally and emotionally. And I also have a little end of session trick, which is chocolates, something small and sweet to bring people back to their senses and back to the present after they maybe have gone to the past during the session.
Oh, amazing. I love that. I'm sure your clients as well, not only because of the chocolates.
Yeah, which is what I'm finding. So I'll have to jazz that up a bit.
All right. Now, what's your personal guilty pleasure in terms of reality show? I'm not sure whether you watch reality shows or is therapy enough drama already?
So many people, speaking of shows, so many people have recommended Billions or Shrinking to me, and I have not managed to make it past one episode of either show. My favorite show of all time for many years long ago was The Sopranos, but after I started graduate training to become a therapist, I could not watch it because I wanted to reach through the screen and shake Dr. Jennifer Melfi and ask her, "What are you doing?" So my guilty pleasure is actually Love is Blind on Netflix. I have watched every single season and every single country edition. I really, really enjoy analyzing what kind of therapy does this reality dating show participant need more than they need an instant marriage.
I love that you say that because most often people are probably kind of like, hiding under the table, not revealing that they love Love is Blind. I personally watch Love is Blind. It's just,
it is fascinating.
It's an easy way to also switch off and just, experience how they're going through that experiment. Something that I started watching recently is Cheat. And they actually have a couples therapist on the show as well. So maybe you
So
might want to
maybe I'll
tune
make it
in.
past one episode. I saw it come up today, but I don't generally watch things without it being vetted because I'm so terrified of wasting my time. So maybe I will check out Cheat.
Have a look at that. All right. So let's get to know you and your early life a little bit better. And so, what was your childhood like? You grew up in, or you moved to 8 different countries so far. I'm sure you're going to add on a lot more than that. How did your cross cultural upbringing and also global relocations shape your identity?
Um, is it okay? Maybe I shouldn't ask permission. Just give myself permission. I think the childhood internal experience and the childhood external experience are different, which I think is true for anybody, right, who's doing some kind of inner work. So the internal experience of childhood, I remember very distinctly thinking around age 10, is there something wrong with me? I seem to think a lot and feel a lot. And growing up in a traditional Chinese family, which maybe you can relate to, feelings and metaphysical questions like meaning and fulfillment, they just weren't discussed. I think the survival strategy for my parents' generation, they were born into a famine. They grew up in so much political strife. It was basically like civil war in China. For them, like if you cover the physical needs, feed your kid, clothe them, send them to school, you've done an amazing job. So I had all of these reflections and thoughts every day, and I couldn't really find anyone to talk about them with. I just ended up reading and writing a lot, and that was my way of making sense of the world around me and inside of me. I guess that was processing before I even knew what processing meant. In terms of all the relocations and the cross cultural upbringing, your book really resonated with me. I think you used the term third culture individual. I had always used the word third culture kid, but maybe at 44, I'm old enough to not call myself a kid anymore. So I left China as a child when my parents moved to Southeast Asia, and then I left Southeast Asia alone at 18 to attend university in the US. And these kinds of moving between places and being the other gave me something that maybe a lot of people don't get until much later in life, which is perspective. Kids are naturally flexible. You have a kid, I have a kid, I have many kids. They'll accept anything and anyone without fixed ideas of how life should be. But as we get older, I notice we become psychologically rigid. So we cling to assumptions, unspoken rules, and we have all these invisible expectations about what's normal or acceptable. And the 8 international relocations and learning 4 languages as an adult, I've kind of seen this over and over that people do things very differently, but everyone is equally convinced that my way is the right way. Their languages shape their thinking, and the stories that they think up, on their own shape their expectations when they interact with others. And, for my work, I feel like that's why so many couples struggle when they're trying to merge 2 lives into one, and why relationship building is such an important part of career building, right? We can't make anything together on a team, whether it's a company, a product, a strategy, or a child, without first learning to see beyond our surface differences to the deeper fundamental emotions that drive all human behavior. Hope, fear, the desire for mastery, fear of rejection, loneliness, insecurity. These are the powerful motivators of human behavior. I do tend to talk a lot, so tell me if I didn't answer your question.
No, that's absolutely fine. And I mean, I love what you mentioned about, trying to kind of process it also as a child. You were writing a lot. I definitely resonate with that. I still remember, I
Journal.
grew up in Germany, and usually the weather is just really horrible. So there's no way to
Yeah.
constantly hang out outside in the park. So I was sitting in my bedroom, usually in the dark, with just like one lamp switch on, and I had my journal, and my journal was actually my best friend at that time. And I would say it's also a very powerful manifestation tool, to be honest. Like when I look through my journals, it's amazing what I've actually managed to manifest into reality. So I think that's something that you and I are still doing very passionately as well. We're both loving to write and putting things down on paper. And that's also, I guess, somehow how we process that's
I
all the
think
stuff
that's
that's going
also
on.
the friendship, right? Like I when I come across writers, I think, oh, this person has a writer's mind. And it doesn't matter if you're published, not published, writing scribbles or, writing a blog or a book. The way you perceive the world and the way I perceive the world is through a reflective, somewhat analytical lens. And I think for me, that was when we first met in person, the click.
Yes, absolutely. But then there's so much more. I mean, you started your career in finance, and so did I. I was in oil and gas, and my first job was actually in finance. Then you later moved into journalism before transitioning into therapy. So, what sparked each shift?
Yeah. Finance was the easy, practical choice. It was an immigrant's choice, a good Chinese daughter's choice. I graduated after September 11th, so work visas in the US were really, really difficult to get, especially for Chinese passport holders in that era. And I knew, heading into my last year at university that nobody was going to pay to sponsor me for a visa to read French novels every day, right? That would have been a dream career in a different life. I also knew that my parents sacrificed a lot to give me a good education. So I wanted to make them proud. And making them proud, in a Chinese family meant getting a prestigious and well paying job to justify all the sacrifices. Growing up, right, I'm getting to the journalism part. My dream was to be a writer, but it was always kind of talked about as a hobby, right? Nobody ever said that's a job. In fact, I think many people told me that is not a job. When my father passed away in my 20s, I had some opportunities to take short sabbaticals from I was working at Credit Suisse then. So I had opportunities to take short sabbaticals, and I wanted to pursue that dream. Um, at the same time, I started also reading psychology, philosophy, and religion as a way of, I think, helping myself through the grief. So therapy wasn't really a career at the beginning. It was kind of a self-help exercise. I couldn't conceptualize it that way then, but what I was looking for after my dad died, he was only 50 years old, was a sense of meaning and purpose because when he passed away, I had worked so hard to give him a life that looked good on paper. I had a finance job. I was engaged to a hedge fund manager. I had kind of made it, and he was happy when he went. My life was set. But as soon as he died, it all felt so empty. And I was wondering, like, what is the purpose of all this, right? If I've lived more than half of my life, if I die at the same age as my father, then what is it that I really need to be doing? So I kind of just did casual reading, then enrolled in one grad school class, and then kept doing a class a year sometimes less, sometimes more, until, finally at 40, my husband said, "You've been doing this for over 10 years. Are you actually going to finish this degree? And what are you going to do with it?" I think that was kind of the final kind of shift, right?
Right, right. Well, I guess that's really for us a great eye opener just to assess whether we're living our own life or whether we're just trying to please others. And I guess, in an immigrant household or especially a Asian household, we do try to kind of please
Yeah,
our parents. And I mean, my dad is still the biggest critic, right? So me leaving a Fortune 500 company after being the head of operations, he was like, why are you throwing all of that away? Like, for what? And
for
I guess
sure.
it's also like not seeing the big brand on my business card, right?
Yeah,
And not being able to maybe brag to his friends, his family members. And I just had to learn that I don't need his validation, right? I'm enough. But I think this
for
is
sure.
also something that I still struggle with, at times. Yeah. To,
When the authority is living and breathing and thinks differently than you,
yes,
right? In a
yes.
sense, my father passing away was a tragedy for me, but in a sense, it was also a sense of autonomy that finally no one's going to give me the script. I just have to make it up.
Yeah.
And, I went through many years where my mother, was doing, I think maybe what your father still questions sometimes now. But, with time and with kind of seeing my success as well as happiness, I think she's coming around to it, feeling proud, though in a Chinese family, you'd never say, "I'm proud of you."
That's not their love language, right? Words of
Yeah.
affirmation is definitely not. I guess it's more acts of service where they cut fruit for
Yeah.
you.
Exactly, and tell you to wear socks and like go out of their way to do something that you didn't think you needed. Yeah.
Now, was there a pivotal moment when you realized, I mean, you changed then from journalism to therapy, but was there a pivotal moment when therapy felt like not just a job, but really a calling for you?
Yeah, I think there was an aha moment, but I still didn't dare to apply it to myself. The aha moment was the first therapist I ever saw. She was a Dutch Indonesian woman living in Beijing named Magda. And this was after my father had passed away. I was struggling with grief, but I didn't even know that the word was grief. I met her, and in the first session, I kind of told her my short life story. And she said to me, and this stuck with me for all these years, she said, so you have to be an American at your job, and then you go home and you have to be a good Chinese daughter to your mom. And then in your relationship, you have to be European because your partner is European. No wonder you're exhausted. You're living three lives in one. And in that moment, I didn't leap forward and say, oh, I should become a therapist. But it actually just like made me finally see my own life and my struggles, not my fault, but a natural byproduct of the complexity of the life I had lived. Up until that point, I had compared myself to all my peers. And, you and I are a bit like a minority, right? We have so many different fabrics on the quilt of our lives that when we compare to somebody who maybe grew up and is doing the same thing that his great great parents did, there's a lot less room for anxiety and uncertainty and insecurity. So that was my light bulb moment for myself. The career pivots didn't come, until 40 when my husband had that sit down with me like, are you actually going to leave finance and are you going to do it at 50 instead of 40? Is that going to be any better or any easier?
Mm.
And that was what gave me, I think, the courage. Funny, I'm trying to be all emancipated and feminist and kind of battle my own cultural biases. But it took a white man, telling me, you can quit your job and go try something different for me to actually do it.
I mean, we all need that kind of external nudge, right? I still
Yeah.
remember for me, it happened in 2016. So exactly like, or 2015, even 8 years ago. And it was actually a friend of mine who went through a very similar journey me after that. So basically he was working at Barclays. He's one of the VPs. And then he decided he wanted to do something else and he wanted to go do coaching. So he went through this whole coaching training and then I just came back from a business trip, and that one was actually not a really fun conference because we had to tell our team members that we're going to restructure, we're going to reorganize, and a lot of people are going to be losing their jobs, and my job would be made redundant as well. That would be the second time in Shell, and then I was at that crossroads. I didn't know, should I still be staying at Shell? I was offered other roles, even a promotion. Should I change to another company because I've never seen another employer? Like Shell was my one and only one.
Yeah.
Or should I then take the leap into doing, and I've always imagined myself running my own business, but I wasn't really clear about what is it that I wanted to do. So I sat down with my friend who just went through that coaching training, didn't know that he was actually using all these new tools that he has learned. And he asked me this powerful question: if there is no financial constraint, Fiona, what is it that you want to do? And then so
Yeah.
I started opening up, right? And I started telling him what I really wanted to do. And I told him, I'm thinking about that maybe in my 50s, but probably similar
Yeah.
to what your husband asked you.
We're all,
Why?
yeah.
Why wait until you're 50? So at that time, I was like in my mid 30s, and I was not really planning to have like a child yet, but I was also thinking if I would stay in corporate, I would like to spend a little bit more time with my child, and I'm going to be an older mom. So I kind of like mentally prepared for that already, like that transition. Running your own business, definitely. Yes. Let's not glamorize it. There are definitely lots of challenges, but there's also the level of flexibility that you wouldn't have, right? If you're
Yeah.
employed. So yeah, definitely resonate with that, and great on your husband to give you that nudge. We all need that. And you and I, we also bonded on this other topic around fertility. And
Yeah.
I think yesterday was, in most countries it was Mother's Day. So I definitely always, when I send out Mother's Day wishes, even on Instagram, on social media, I always want to make sure that we also acknowledge those who are struggling to become a mom or even bereaved mothers.
Yes.
So it's also my personal story. I've gone through two miscarriages in my late 30s, and then finally my rainbow baby happened
Yeah.
in early 2023. And you have been extremely open about your IVF journey. Can you share a little bit more what that chapter of your life looked like and also what surprised you the most?
Gosh, it's so fraught. Sometimes it's hard to know where to begin. I think I have been vocal because one of the first surprises was just how hard it was. Um, I volunteer with infertility groups now, and I do counseling specifically for couples going through IVF or experiencing kind of perinatal, so anything having to do with pregnancy, childbirth, mood issues. Um, I think at that time, now I recognize that we don't talk about infertility. We don't talk about fertility until we're infertile. Right?
Yes.
Nobody thinks about it. It's kind of assumed that it'll just happen. And so much, as girls especially, so much of our upbringing is centered around prevention of pregnancy. So it surprised me that it was not a precise medical procedure with guaranteed outcomes, but it is kind of presented this way. You go into it, there's so many facts to learn, so many medications, schedules, ultrasounds, blood tests, so many technical aspects that I think, especially for high achievers and people, who have some a high powered white collar corporate job, it's easy to kind of latch onto the procedure and associate that with success because that's everything we have been taught, right? Work hard and you will succeed. And nobody at the outset of IVF, I think very few clinics, I've come across one in Singapore that mandates you must have a counseling session at the start of IVF. Nobody tells you before you go into it that this is a hugely emotional journey. And in my role as a couples therapist, I also know that while trying to make a family and do something positive for the marriage, so many couples either break up or they carry that resentment for 10, 20, 30 years, right? I see couples where they talk about how they've become roommates and how they just resent each other and they're so
Yes.
estranged. But when we trace the origin, it goes back to like that first year when we did IVF and I was grieving the loss of embryos, eggs, babies in a
Yes.
certain way, but you weren't there for me. So I think the biggest surprise is emotional impact. That's, I think, broadly for everyone. Maybe that comes as a surprise. So I want to be vocal in educating people because the expectation to reality gap is what creates and deepens a lot of mood and mental illness, mental health issues. On a personal level, I think the biggest shock for me was secondary infertility, which I didn't know about also until I experienced it, which is you can have one IVF baby and you think you've figured it out. It's not pleasant, but you can do it again. And then when you're trying to have another one, it could be a totally different journey, which was my case. We got to the point where I thought, okay, we're just going to have, I'm going to have one biological child. I have two stepchildren who are older. And I had, for so many years, not wanted to have an only child as an immigrant living as a third culture kid
Mm.
because it was so lonely for me.
Wow. I mean, as what you mentioned rightly, we never really talk about infertility or fertility until we're
It becomes
trying.
infertility.
Yes,
Yeah.
until we're impacted. And I think a lot of it is also, as you said, we talk a lot about prevention, but I think also as women in this generation, we are also having so many other balls to juggle. We have our careers to focus on. And, they always tell us you can have it all. But to be honest, like when I speak to my younger friends who are in their early 30s or even late 20s, I do remind them to actually consider that, especially if they don't have a partner yet. Consider what
Yeah.
is it that you're going to do, even if it's just freezing eggs, but
Yeah.
just find out what are the options because I
Options and
thought,
data.
yeah, because I thought that, for me, I'm just going to focus on my career and then, it's just going to be fine. If we try it out, definitely is going to happen immediately. And I think
Yeah.
like now opening up about infertility for us, it was an unexplained infertility. We've done all the checks, everything biologically seemed okay. And I think it's also a little bit, I'm not sure whether you've seen the Pixar movie Soul. So that little soul is just not ready to come to us, right? And it is a magical and also a spiritual process that we tend to forget. It's not just biological. And,
Yeah.
people will tell you when you're trying really hard, they will tell you just relax and it will happen. But you can't
Yeah.
because you have your calendar, right? You need to know when you're ovulating.
It's counter to every message we've already been given, right? Our whole lives, we've been pushed to try harder, try harder. You got 98% on the test, go get 100. And then suddenly people are telling you for the most important decision and, project in your adult life, the one that I think for many people still defines womanhood, right? You're
Mhm.
biologically incomplete and unfulfilled as a woman until you experience, physical pregnancy and biological birth. Then to suddenly turn around and tell us, oh, just relax, it'll happen. Like, what is this kumbaya attitude suddenly? I think it's so great that you mentor younger women about getting information and preserving optionality. And this phrase of like, can we have it all? I've been giving a series of talks at companies. I gave this talk at Stripe. I've done it on stage. I call it the How Can Women Have It All? And it's really pinpointing this decade of the 30s for many women today, which is when you're trying to build out your career. And it's the exact same time when you're trying to build out your family. And there are trade offs that happen. But we have been told because we were born in the post feminist era that you can have it all. So why aren't you having it? And in fact, I think in the era, was it 2014, when Apple or Facebook became the first employer to offer egg freezing benefits? It was almost like women, we've solved your problems. Just freeze your eggs. But I couldn't freeze my eggs at 34. I had such low egg yield. It would have taken me 5 cycles to get to the recommended 20 eggs for a round of egg freezing. But even the 20 eggs, if you dig behind it, the statistics are that the 20 eggs will get you a 17% chance of a live birth. For someone who really wanted to have biological children, 17% I knew wasn't going to allay any of my fears. It wasn't going to change, my attitudes on what to do in relationships too.
That's still an ongoing struggle. And I think like we really need to talk more about this and educate, especially the younger women. I'm not saying
Yeah.
that I regret anything that I've done in my life. Would I have tried it earlier if I've known? Personally, I don't
Yeah.
think so. I do love how I lived my life and also enjoyed my partnership with my husband, for 20
Yeah.
years now. But as you mentioned, it's not even going through an IVF journey, but through all this miscarriages and infertility. It definitely is going to either bring you together or kind of
Break you.
break you. So, and it's not only partnerships, but also friendships, right? So I remember at the time
Yeah.
when I've gone through 2 miscarriages, all of a sudden I'm getting all these notifications on Instagram or even WhatsApp messages on announcements, right? Baby
Babies.
announcements. Yeah, and that's really painful. And I always think to myself, and I also mentioned to my husband, like, it's just, I'm happy for them, but I'm just sad
Yeah.
for us, right?
Yeah. And that kind of plays into the emotional toll, right? Because on top of doing this thing in secret, and majority of people are, starting IVF or battling infertility in secret because they don't think anybody else understands. Everybody else seems to be, just taking a P test and voila, it was magical. Nobody tells you, oh, we timed our cycle, we have
Yes.
sex during 2 days in a 4-day window every month. My husband flies back, or I flew along with him on his business trips. Like, these are all real things that I've heard from people after I started opening up. But in that phase, your social life, you really do become isolated, both from your romantic partner, because men and women are maybe grieving the losses of IVF
Mhm.
differently. But socially, you feel like a bad person suddenly. You're like, am I guilty? Am I selfish? Am I, is it wrong of me to not want to go to my friend's baby shower? Or, be joyful, be unequivocally joyful. And I
Mhm.
think that's one of the first adult woman moments in life where you realize your feelings can be very complex and seemingly in conflict with each other. But that's just the reality of being human. You can have two or multiple things that seem to conflict but are both simultaneously true.
Absolutely. Now, I personally also had experience with therapy before. I struggled with an eating disorder for 2 decades, and I've seen therapists in the States and in Germany, in Hong Kong. And I
Yeah.
found someone who has gone through the whole eating disorder journey as well. She recovered. But I felt that because she has gone through it herself, she was somewhat projecting her narrative, her journey onto me. And you have struggled with, fertility. You've gone through IVF. How did your personal IVF journey influence now your professional life, especially as a therapist? And, you're coaching and supporting others through their life transitions. How does that influence how you conduct your therapy sessions?